hello. We're here at BioEurope Spring today. I'm here with Nerida Scott from Johnson & Johnson Innovation. So Nerida, please tell me, what do you look for when deciding what to invest in a biotech company?
Thanks very much for the time to be able to talk. So Johnson & Johnson Innovation is looking at early stage innovation across EMEA from the London Innovation Centre. And what we're really looking for is those nuggets that are going to be transformational. So it's usually very early stage. It's tested to a certain degree, but there's still lots of risk involved by its very nature. And I think what we're looking for is different ways to help accelerate that science that will be truly transformational. So it has to be game-changing, disruptive, transformational, and hence risky. And that's the kind of investment that J&J is actually looking to nurture and to bring forward.
Okay. So why did J&J set up the Innovation Centre in the first place? What do they hope to gain from the investments?
Yeah, so it's a really good question because, there were already established business development groups. But I think the whole concept that the innovation has to be so transformational and hence it's undeveloped, it hasn't come forward, it's not necessarily hitting the radar of public sites. They're not in clinical studies yet. They're not above the parapet. We're wanting to get into the ecosystem, and to do that effectively, you really need to be in the location. You need to know the people who are innovating. You need to know the people who are funding early stage innovation, and be part of the mix and help shape it, help create it, and help accelerate it.
Okay.
So we have 4 innovation centers located in London, Shanghai, Boston, and California. And in each of those innovation centers, we have leading edge scientists, we have transactors, and we also have our equity partners. So we can invest as well, as do collaborations, licenses, options, etc. So it gives us the tools to be able to do the right kind of deal for the science that's in front of us.
Okay. So, I'm interested to hear, I'm sure you've heard this question before, but how independent are the companies that J&J invest in? Is J&J just acting as an independent investor, or is the aim to bring in new R&D components for the bigger?
Yeah, so the investment companies that are attached to different pharmas have different briefs. So the brief that JJDC, which is Johnson & Johnson's innovation group, has and has always had, it was the first venture capital group actually within a pharma company, well established and always on strategic message. So their investments are in areas that J&J is actually interested in developing. So yes, so we don't typically take controlling interests in companies we invest in, but we do typically take very active roles in helping bring forward and contribute to how that company might develop, whether it's on the SAB, board seat, board observer seats. But the investment, along with other consortia or collaborators for that technology, are all looking to try and advance it to make it more attractive. J&J is looking for those opportunities that advance in a way that J&J believes that they can take them forward, and at that point may have a license, may have an option, may have an acquisition.
Okay.
But yeah, initially in very early stage companies with different modalities, testing different modalities, and equity investment as a standalone engagement may be the right way to go.
Okay, so they have reasonable independence then,
the company?
Yeah,
for sure. I think, we don't take controlling stakes.
Yeah. Okay. So, what topic areas does J&J look into? If you're looking at who to invest in,
So J&J is actually a really large company. I think most people know us because of the consumer brands, Johnson & Johnson, but actually that's the smallest component of the company, the consumer area. So the pharma area is under the brand name Janssen, and that's the largest, probably generating about almost half the sales of the company. And then we have medical devices as well. So those businesses are very large businesses in and of themselves. I think if you took medical devices out of J&J, it would be the second largest medical device business in the world. Whereas in J&J, it's about 35% of the sales. So it's a very, very large company. In the pharma sector, we're interested in oncology, in immunology, in neuroscience, cardiovascular metabolism, pulmonary hypertension, of course, which came through the acquisition of Actelion a couple of years ago, and infectious diseases and vaccines. So there's a strong history in all of those areas for the company, and they're the main focus for the pharma space. But obviously, in all of those areas, there's many different technologies, platforms, modalities of approaching diseases, and we're very interested in trying to intercept and find disease earlier, so to prevent, intercept, and cure.
Okay.
So there's a lot of focus on trying to find very disruptive kind of technologies that will help us stay well, rather than wait till we're sick and try and cure us then.
So when you're deciding who to invest in, do you tend to stick with the wider range of areas, or do you ever invest in other areas?
So I think, there's always a discussion about, how much you focus on areas of strategic strength today versus what you look to as your future interests. I think the innovation centers provide the opportunity for us to understand where the landscape may go, and they provide the opportunity and the base from which we can experiment with investments and collaborations outside of our core focus. But the majority of what we do is focused on what the business is doing today. But yeah, the whole idea is that, healthcare will move on, and we want to be at the forefront to understand where it's going to go and help shape and drive that as well.
Okay. So what are the results from the Open Innovation Startup Contest? Is it measurable?
So that's a really interesting question, because I guess some of what we do is direct investment into the ecosystem. So open innovation, for example, in areas where we're not necessarily taking a direct right or a direct license. So for example, in neuroscience, I think is a really good case in point. Very many late stage studies have failed in the recent past, and there's a real need to understand the biology of the disease and the progression and the onset of the disease, which happens like 20 years before you start to see symptoms in some cases, like for Alzheimer's. Is very much a need to go back to the basic biology and try and understand the disease in more detail. Now that is in the pot that I would call open innovation, because what we do is we get involved in collaborations like the neuroinflammation collaboration, where we contribute anti-inflammatory compounds, for example, into early stage models, and other partners, both industry and charity, invest in trying to understand the disease, how it's working with tool compounds, different biomarkers and assays, and try and come up with better disease understanding, at which point it would then flip into something that would be more asset driven, that companies may need to protect with IP or something like that. So absolutely, we're driving, the ecosystem in terms of open innovation for specific areas where we think there's a need for more basic understanding, and we share that philosophy with other players that we find. And then in terms of sort of the early, your other part of the question in terms of, startup slams and the sources of that early stage innovation, I think we have a vast array of different places that we go to try and find early stage innovation. And the startup slams have been a really interesting one. I think it allows us the opportunity to see and encourage and mentor early stage science, oftentimes early stage entrepreneurs. So quite often it's, their first or second company. And I think it's a really helpful tool to be able to really understand what's going on at the coalface and to be able to bring that forward. I think those opportunities, though, typically are very early stage, right? So they will take time to mature. I mean, I think, if you see some of the multi-billion-dollar biotech companies today, they've all been in existence for 10, 15, some of them 20 years. And that's not unexpected. Science has to evolve a lot, to bring it forward. But I think it's a commitment from J&J to invest in the ecosystem to help build the talent pool, particularly here in Europe. There's great talent, there's fantastic science, and how we can help nurture it and help mentor people is very valuable. So the startup slams are an important part of that. The open innovation is important, but we also get, companies coming through quick fire challenges and obviously through other VC networks and tech transfer offices, small biotech incubation parks, etc. And we obviously have JLab's model that helps incubate companies, which is linked to the startup slam as well. So, some of the prizes for the startup slam is residency time there. So it's a whole ecosystem, and it only works if all the different parts are in play and we can bring it forward. But yeah, there's been some really interesting successes. One of the early stage companies that was part of our startup competition maybe about 3 or 4 years ago is now being incubated in our J-Labs in Vienna, winning various prizes. It's great to see these companies progress. Raising more funds.
Great.
So they're heading in the right direction.
So I think that's a good point to say. What 3 tips would you give a startup looking for investment?
So only 3. I think
you've got to narrow it down.
Yeah, no, look, there's so many moving parts. I think the right thing is to understand the science and what are the really critical questions to answer in the science. I think then it's finding the money to help you navigate to do that in the best way that gives you options at the end of it. So don't just look at the science today. Plan for the future. Look at the finance that's going to take you through the next few steps, and think about how you're going to create a bigger picture for your company. So I think those are the 3.
But if they were coming to you and looking for investment, I mean, you'd want them to have a plan of how they were going to.
Yeah, we're happy to discuss how those plans pan out. What we see is important, because a lot of very early stage entrepreneurs may have come from the scientific field, so they're very passionate about their science. They believe in the potential for the benefit to human health, but they might not have all the financial, fundraising skills. They might not have all the understanding of all the development stages and where the risk disperses as you bring something forward, and what's needed to make a product commercial. Those things we can bring, we can help, as part of the discussion. But I think it's really helpful to have the big picture and the understanding and the ambition, right?
Yeah, of course, definitely. So I wonder, you've been working in this area for a while now. I mean, what changes have you noticed in the European biotech financing and investment over the last 10 to 15 years? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about big pharma looking to invest more in smaller biotechs and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's been your experience?
No, so it's interesting. So sort of 10, 15, even 20 years ago, it was really hard to find translational funding. And in Europe, I think, in the US, you see slightly different dynamics, because a lot of the institutes have their own sort of seed funding as part of the university. I think that's less common in Europe. And I think, there's been a huge number of changes to ensure that there's more access to early stage capital. And I think you also see a huge increase in the size of some of the rounds, so early stage investment going in, which changes the dynamic. So I think there's more sources for early stage innovation, and I think there's more money going in earlier in some instances as well. So I think they're the major drivers. But I think there are a number of new players. There are a number of new players who are bringing in funds that are specifically for this sort of translational work. A number of angel investors, and the increase, particularly in the UK. I think the tax, the preferential tax structures to help investors in SMEs has made a huge difference.
Okay, that's
so you see a lot of wealthy individual and angel investment that was a lot more expensive before. I think, though, as you travel around Europe, it differs. It differs markedly between countries. So I think there's still work to do. I think there's still ways to help early stage academic science translate into SMEs, and I think there's still ways to help SMEs grow and develop their science to be more late stage or clinical stage programs. And those stages are getting better elucidated with the types of funds that I think we see rising. But yeah, I think the amounts of money are definitely increasing, which I think is really helpful.
Okay. I mean, would you agree that there's been a bit of a move from having in-house R&D to, can't think of the right words, externalize, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I think particularly for J&J, Paul Stoffels was really, really passionate about making sure that no matter how much you invest in R&D, you can never invest enough. There's more going on in the world outside your walls than there are inside. Even when you spend, like a company of J&J's size across the whole business, between 6 and 8 billion in R&D a year, there's still more going on outside your walls. And I think the idea that you can work with other partners and share the investment, the risk, and the upside is a really big strategic change for a lot of a lot of large pharma. So I think Paul's stated ambition that was that 50% of the pipeline would come from external sources.
Okay.
And I think, J&J is well on the road to doing that. There's a very strong cultural drive to find external innovation and to bring it forward and to make sure that it's coming forward in the right way. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
That's
That
all
was
right.
great.
It's good to talk to you.
And yeah, nice.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen.
Thank you.